Welcome to the For Everyday Leaders podcast. Brandon Faust, Alex Holt, here with you today. Alex, why don't you tell us what this podcast is all about?
Yeah, this podcast is all about helping people lead in the everyday spaces and moments of life. And today we have a really, really good friend of ours on the show. We've got Matt Curts with us. Matt owns and operates Bogan Eyecare with his wife, Dr. Stephanie Curts, in Brownsburg, Indiana. Matt has held...
I was going to say Stephanie has been my eye doctor for well over a decade now.
Okay.
Nice. So that was actually before I even knew Matt. That was one of the ways that I knew of the Curts family.
Thanks for paying for my kids' college education.
You're welcome.
Matt has also held the title of CFO and other VP roles throughout his career. He's the managing partner of a consulting company called Switchback. He is the husband to Stephanie and the father of 4 great kids.
And Matt, welcome. Thanks for joining us. We didn't have to go too far to find you, which is great. But Matt, we met, in 2012, around that time, attending the same church. Then we, for a little time, worked at that same church. We've been good friends ever since. I'd like to think we've been good friends ever since. And then we've been running around. We've started some different things together. Matt was instrumental in helping us start Wayfinders, serves on the board there, super involved in all of the Wayfinders comings and goings and all the things, but is also, pioneering in a lot of other ways and providing leadership and all kinds of generosity into our local community. And so it's fun and it's awesome to have somebody like you sitting with us. And I think your story is one that we're excited to share because I think it's a unique journey, but I also think people are going to kind of find their story within yours as well. So thanks for jumping in.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Well, we're going to go on a journey and we're going to hear about Matt's life, his career, and kind of these everyday leadership principles that he's experienced in his life and leadership. But tell us, as we get started, kind of where you grew up and what was life like for you growing up, man?
Yeah, sure. I still live in the town that I grew up in, honestly. So I probably will die in that town. So it's a smallish town, I guess I would call it now, right? It's probably 40,000 people, but when I was growing up, it was not 40,000 people. It might have been 5,000 to 7,000 people. So a couple stoplights, you knew your neighbors. If you didn't know them personally, they were acquaintances. Everybody just knew who everybody was and kind of knew everybody's stuff. So you live in a bubble. Pretty great upbringing. Honestly, I grew up with 2 loving parents, an amazing home. I have an older brother, a younger sister, and life was just good. It was kind of like a Norman Rockwell existence, honestly. Often felt like I needed to apologize for that later in life and learned that I don't really, just need to be thankful for that and just that blessing of it. So, yeah, growing up, you kind of become centered, who you are. It allows you to kind of just stay firm in certain values and beliefs that you have, even though some of those changed later in life. But it's nice to have a place that you can call home and have called home your entire life. It's where I met my wife. She's from the same small town, and we high school sweethearts. So just kind of tail into the high school. She didn't really want to have anything to do with me because my younger years I was a little wild. But met a girl, so that kind of helped me straighten out and get my course of life on the right track. And so just been a blessing. I think 23 years now. I'm married in 2000, so it's easy when you get married in 2000. You just take the year you're in, right?
Oh, that's amazing. I was in middle school then.
Yeah.
Thanks for that, man.
I was 9.
Oh my gosh.
So that's cool.
You guys are killing me, man.
But it is really cool because I remember, it was a few months ago, you took me to buy the home you grew up in,
Yeah.
And it was just kind of cool because I feel like that is in our generations, it is rare, Yeah. I grew up in Michigan, stayed there for a while, and then I've been, in this community for 11 years or so.
Yeah.
So it is unique, and Matt often tells people, he's like, well, I'm the kind of guy that gets my hair cut at the same place for the last 40 some years, and it's like, that's amazing. It's rare, but I think there's also something beautiful about that. And we'll kind of get to that a little bit more in the story of just staying somewhere, being present there, the community, the connections, all that kind of stuff that I think is really, really unique. So tell us a little bit, how'd you end up on your career path? Obviously we know that you met Stephanie in high school and you guys got married, but what was kind of interest for you as you were in high school, moving to those college years? Kind of how'd you get moving, and then kind of the story of where you ended up today.
Yeah, sure. So, college choice for me was pretty simple. Just waited to see where Stephanie would end up. And Stephanie ended up at Butler. I wasn't smart enough to go to Butler, so I ended up at IUPUI. And I had an opportunity to go to IU Bloomington. And again, with kind of my background, I probably would not have graduated. So it was a good idea for me to stay at home. I lived at home. I stayed next to my girlfriend, and it worked out. So I always had an interest in business. I think my dad's an entrepreneur, and just in me thought I would be an entrepreneur one day. And so that was always kind of a driver for me. And so kind of getting into college and into business school, you have just different disciplines that you can select from. But at the time, honestly, it's funny, they didn't have as many, because you guys just pointed out that I'm old. You had like marketing, and you had accounting, and you might have had like business administration. And that was pretty much it. And so I picked accounting, and it wasn't just because I didn't have any love for numbers or anything of that nature. It was just I thought I could make the most money out of school doing that and get the best opportunities to maybe advance in the business world. And that's why I took it. So I went into accounting, and I was always told you're the most non-normal accountant we've ever met. And that happened a lot throughout my career, but ended up in the largest public accounting firm in the world right out of school. And that was extremely formative for me. I learned more in those 3.5 years than I probably had in almost 30 years of my career from a competency standpoint. So competency was just key to learn there. You learned so much, but you were working 80 hours a week, and it was just a grind, But I had worked for a guy in college who owned a small business here in town in Indianapolis, and I actually worked full time while I went to school. I just loved that company, him so much that I decided to do that. And so he had wanted me to come work for him after school, and I just decided I need to go get some more experience somewhere else. But about 3 or 4 years of that, and there was a big scandal with Arthur Anderson and Enron and all these things. So public accounting was kind of going out the back door. So I went back to work for him, and got back into working with the Pioneer Entrepreneur. And honestly, that was the thing that probably changed the whole trajectory of my life.
Yeah, that's good. So talk about that change. What was it about going back to work for that gentleman that really changed that trajectory? Because I think as I've talked to you, as we've talked, that was very formative in shaping where you are today. So talk more about that.
Yeah, it was just it was being in contact with a leader. It was being in contact with someone who took enough time to care about you personally and to invest in you.
Yeah.
So Larry Becker was his name, and Larry, I think I wanted to emulate him when I first met him because he was a successful guy, charismatic guy, one of those guys that walks in the room and, like the jukebox stops and everything, turns around. And so it was really, that's what I wanted to emulate, and just kind of watched his life. But he invited me everywhere. I mean, I'm a 24-year-old kid, I think, at the time. And literally, I'm going to every single meeting with him. I'm being invited into his office to have meetings with every employee. He's taking me to dinner at his house. Meaning is, I'm around his kids. So just this idea of watching someone live life and do life was probably the greatest education that I could have ever received. I think there's a lot of things, obviously, we talk about competency, and you have to learn skills. But to watch someone, how they work psychologically, how their time horizons, how they think, it takes a long time to be around that, and then you start to pick up those traits. But what I recognized about him most was he was just servant.
Yeah.
He was a servant leader, and I knew there was something that attracted to me that was just different than any other successful person, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. And we had a moment. I remember, we had over 200 employees, and we were the landscape contractors. So you can imagine in that business, a lot of your labor, they live paycheck to paycheck, man.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a rough life. They work a lot of hours, and it can be tough on them. And so a lot of times what you find is paycheck advancements. They would need paycheck advancements, those things that you see all over the poor neighborhoods, right? And so they would come to us, they would ask us for these things. And I remember one specific employee who we really just loved and adored, and was a great man, great family man. and he had needed an advancement. He was in some hot water just because of some medical bills that were coming in. And I remember he came in to ask, and he was so shy. He was so proud to. He didn't want to ask for that money.
Yeah.
And Larry had asked me to come in the office and sit down and just listen, and I watched, and this gentleman says, I've got some issues going on. He said, well, how much money do you need? And he told him an amount. I think it was like $1,500 and at the time. And that's a lot of money. And I remember Larry looking back at him and say, are you sure that's all you need?
Wow.
And I'm thinking, who is this guy? Like, I wouldn't just hand money, right? Like, he already pays them.
Right.
So at the time, I didn't understand. I didn't have any understanding besides myself and what I could gain from my life. And so then he said, what do you mean? He said, well, I don't want you coming back here. I want to help you. So I'm actually helping you, not harming you, to keep coming back. And so he ended up like with $3,000 is what the amount. But what was so unbelievable about it was, he said, I'm going to give you $3,000. He pulls his desk drawer open and gets his personal checkbook out and writes a check for $3,000 and hands it to him. And I remember that moment so vividly because it was like, who is this guy? Right? There's something different about him, and I want what he has.
Yeah.
And at the time, I didn't know what that was.
Well, and I think that's where, I think that a lot of times, whether it's in parenting, whether you're coaching, athletes, whether you're in the workplace, I think there's a lot of times like a younger leader is like, just what's my path? I want to raise my hand, but I don't know how. But sometimes just a leader to say, I don't know what your destination is, but I do want you to come experience and be with me because I think my way of doing things is going to maybe have some sort of functional, impression and transfer, but also this character kind of formation that's caught, and that, change in watching somebody like Larry wasn't just something that someone could write down on a piece of paper or put into an online course or whatever. Well, they probably didn't have online courses back in the Stone Age.
Probably
but,
not. Do you know what the internet is?
Oh my goodness.
But also to say, hey, here's a series of experiences that make you think twice about how life is lived. What does leadership look like? What does business look like? Yeah. And I'm sure even in that moment, you're like, this guy's about to give him money, and you have this kind of accounting brain, and you're like,
that's right.
Where are we accounting for?
Yeah, the numbers. The
like
numbers
what is going on here? And so I think that really is this idea of like what's being caught, and as a leader, that invitation to say, hey, there might be somebody, and you don't have to commit to them being some role or some title, but sometimes that young person or that person that's looking to you for some reason maybe just needs an invitation to be around you, and see how you live. And is the way you're living actually worth observing, which is can be kind of startling.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that, it's also interesting too. There was nothing about him, as you kind of even describe that, as like that he would lorded it over me. Like he was, there was an expectation of his, like, oh, you're going to work for me then for the rest of your career, or you're going to be the number 2 guy. I ended up becoming the number 2, worked for 13 years for him. And, gladly, right? Because this is my mentor. He was like a second father. Still to this day, I consider him one of, the greatest mentors of my life. And so, there was nothing though that like this expectation that was attached to it. I never was made to feel guilty. It was just, come along, watch. And really an interest in me and a hope for me. Because even the place where I eventually left, because I think that sometimes in leadership, especially, people have to leave one another. You have to learn how to go give it a go on your own. But I remember the conversation, and the conversation was very difficult, because I felt like I needed to go out and test some of these things that I had learned from him and see if I had what it took, And that conversation, I'll never forget, was this comment that he made to me that stayed with me forever too. Is he said, you know what, Matt? He said, the true mark of friendship isn't how much we see one another. It's that we pick up with each other right where we left off, and we do. And I'm telling you, man, I don't see that guy for a year and a half, and it's exactly that. It's truly the definition of friendship. So I think that's probably what I really reflect on. That's what he offered me more than anything was friendship. And he just happened to be a great leader, and I happened to gain a ton from him to be able to carry off in the rest of my career.
Yeah.
Fill in some of those gaps then of where did you end up? What did that look like, and kind of where have you been since?
Yeah. I mean, I do have to, I go back a little bit. One of the things I did learn that made him different was he was a follower of Christ. And I didn't understand that at the time. And so, I didn't know what discipleship was. I didn't know that that's what he was doing to me, that he was teaching me a way of life that led to a life of peace. So I'd come to know the Lord through working with him. And it changed everything in me. It made me start to look outward instead of always looking inward. And so even when I left, I think that I carried that with me. Whereas how do I go into a place and serve? So I left and went and worked for a composites manufacturer that worked for aerospace industry, and worked with guys who didn't have any relationship with Christ. And getting put into that position, I started to learn, I have this ability to tell people the story, to teach people about this way as well, because I learned it so well through the relationship I had. And so relationally, I do well to do that with people. And so the accounting, the finance, all that stuff started to, the interest of that started to wane. I just wasn't enjoying my career anymore.
Yeah.
In a sense, because it's like, the numbers are great, but I'm really infatuated with people.
Yeah.
And so I think that was always there. But when you make that decision in college, I'm just going to go get a job to make money. You don't really consider those things.
Right.
So you just go. And so, I worked there for a few years, and this weight on my heart just kept building and building about, man, you need to be with people full time. You need to be teaching them this life of peace on a more regular basis. And I thought at the time I had to, if I'm going to do that, I have to go into like full-time ministry or something of that nature. And it did happen that way. I had another mentor named Eldon Kibbe, and we were going through a process called Operation Timothy, which is Christian Businessmen's Connection. And Eldon had been, walking with me for a while, and we had gone through like a goals kind of listing of reviewing goals. And man, I was like really, the accountant in me was bad. Like I had 27 goals, right? So I had like 3-month goals, 1-year goal, 3-year goals, and a lifetime. Long story short, like I remember sitting down with Eldon one day at lunch, and he's like, we need to get these down to like 3. And I remember being really aggravated with him. And because I worked hard on those, I built like habits to make sure I get those goals. Stupid stuff, but not stupid, but yet, just over the top.
Right.
And so then, we get to this lifetime goals, and it was like, man, my 50th wedding anniversary is a goal of mine. I want to have one shared activity with my adult children, so when they grow up, I want to share in something that they enjoy, have a friendship there, and then join a discipleship movement. And so I remember Eldon saying that day, everything else is a distraction. These 3 are the only thing that matter. And so walked away from there, and within 24 hours, I got a call from a staff member at my home church, and they offered me a job. And I fought it. I had a situation where I basically was brought onto this company to try to increase the market value so that we could sell the business. And there's a thing called phantom stock that you can get, where I would get a little bit of that money if we sold it. And so my whole posture was, why are you doing this to me? Why are you asking this of me right now when I have this big payout, right? It's supposed big payout coming on the other side. And I was led to the Samaritan woman at the well and just read through that passage. And if you remember in that passage, it's the Samaritan woman saying, how dare you ask me for a cup of water? And that was my posture towards Christ too. It was like, how dare you do this? I'm not ready for this. Even though my wife, when I took it home to her, she's like, yeah, I can see that. I'm like, don't say that. And then it was the next line. And it was when Jesus said, if you knew who I was, you'd ask me.
Yeah.
And that was it, man. And what I realized in that moment was I didn't know him. I knew a lot about him.
Right.
I'd done all the things in the church. I'd done all the leadership roles. I could quote you the scripture backward and forward, but I didn't know Jesus. So I remember in that moment I was pivotal because I realized I want to. I'm desperate for that. So I left the corporate life. I jumped in full steam to full-time ministry. And, within, I think, the first week, right, when I started, Brandon was on staff too. Our pastor of 34 years announced his retirement.
Yep.
And so everything that I was brought on for was like basically just stopped.
Yeah.
Like I was going to help create discipleship pathways, all these things to help mentor people. And they're like, just go run the play that we have, man. And I was miserable.
Yeah.
Absolutely miserable. And, it's interesting because I couldn't put it into words. I was like, I don't know how to say why I'm so angry at everything, because I think I value the things that this place values, right? I say I do. Out of our mouths, we say we do. And it wasn't until I met with Brandon, what was it, 2 years into that maybe? Or it was 2020, I think, again, right? Mm-hmm. I've been through the life mapping process, but I was too much in transition to appreciate it at the time. So in 2020, we revisited the life mapping process with Brandon, and when he explained to me, this idea that we value work differently than our personal values, how we actually produce something matters. We value it differently. Man, that was a game changer for me, because I realized, oh gosh, I value curiosity. Like I want to pick things apart, rebuild them in a different way. I want to be part of courageous cultures. Like, let's just go try something. And if we screw up, who cares? We'll dust ourselves off. And when you work for a 180-year-old church, you're not going to hear things like, yeah, we'd love to make mistakes, or, sure, change everything. And so that moment I realized I didn't have to be angry anymore.
Yeah.
I was at this point now, it's like, this is how I value work. You value work the way you do, and that's okay. And it's okay for me to walk away and then go pursue something different. And then that's where Brandon and I really reconnected.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that time, too, in the life cycle of an organization, when there's transitions and all those kinds of things, and then you see kind of yourself in that, and those can be beautiful invitations and inflection points just to reflect. And you never know what that's going to lead towards. And I know, when I made kind of a leap to start this work in 2019, that the goal was to never do it alone, right? And so, both of you have been absolutely pivotal in that. Matt has been so key and integral to the whole vision and landscape and making it happen. And it's been amazing, wonderful journey in that. And, in the midst of that too, you and your wife bought the eye practice that she had been working at for a long time, and providing, leadership. You've been, involved in leadership there. As you guys own that together, came in this consulting kind of company stuff that I was doing. You've picked that up and are leading the charge on all that stuff, active in Wayfinders here. And just, I think it's a reminder too that sometimes the path is not the one that we predicted or projected. Yeah. And the inflection points and invitations and relationships and how that can really change the trajectory of your purpose and how you activate in the world, how you just go and do work and make a living and all that stuff. And your journey is like, it is all like over the place, but in a beautiful way. And when you hear the story, you see those threads, like even you said, oh, this like accounting and all this kind of finance and all this stuff. And it started to move when you changed and went to that aerospace kind of manufacturing sort of side, like to people. And that continues to be the case of what you prioritize in all of those things, whether it's an eye care practice, whether it's a consulting company, whether it's the work at Wayfinders, all those different things.
Yeah. Yeah, I found that purpose carries you through. Purpose is what drives you. It's the thing that gives you the fuel to move on. I've learned that process can just change on a dime. Yeah. And I think that's the thing. You're right. Like leaving the corporate world into full-time ministry, you think this is it. This is the rest of my life, right? And I'm going to commit myself. So it can be confusing when that changed on me. Yeah. And then reintroduce yourself back into the corporate world. And you're like, what is this? Right. So it's like God can give and take away. And we, to be able to receive and then receive the blessing, but have a different mindset, right? Because I did come to know Jesus during those times when I was at the church, to be able to understand that I look at myself too much, right? I I've not always been the greatest leader. You know, we all come with, we're never complete packages. We come with really great gifts, and we come with some things that we always need to be working on.
Yep.
And so just to be able to understand that, I think when you jump from one culture to another culture, it's helpful, you know. And it's funny because that's coming from a guy who's never left a town that he's lived in his entire life, right? Because you'd think, I've had my hair cut at the same place for 43 years. You'd think that I just know one way.
Yeah.
And God's blessed me to just be able to experience all these different things and these relationships but the thing that stayed the same was stop looking at yourself, look out at everybody else. That's where peace resides, right?
Yeah.
And serve your neighbor.
So Matt, we've talked through a ton. Hearing your story has been amazing, your journey. What is one leadership principle that you feel like if you had to kind of take a lot of the things you've shared that you could share with our audience, that you would say, this is one of the most critical leadership principles that I could impart on those listening?
It's a good question. I think recognition that you are one. I think that's where people struggle all the time is we live in a society that likes to put labels on things, and then we compartmentalize, and we create structure. So it's like, oh, here's your title, here's what you are. And I know you guys know this, but especially when you start having children, there's somebody always watching you.
Yeah.
And so behavior and I believe it's caught, not taught.
Yeah.
I think that it's modeled. And so I think that if people would just really understand and recognize that every single day you have influence on someone. And it doesn't matter. You might think it in the smallest sense that it means nothing. It's huge.
Yeah.
Right. In the long run. The consistency of your daily behavior will impact the life of somebody, whether it's your kids or those around you, whatever, that people are always watching you.
Yeah.
And I think that at first that comes with pressure, it might feel like, oh gosh, that's overwhelming. Somebody's always watching me. But I think to recognize that also means I can teach that to my kids. My kids have influence, right? My 11-year-old daughter has influence over the neighborhood kids. She's a leader, right?
Yep.
But they're leading too. And so, if we could unpack that for ourselves in society, I think we're going to start to see that people can start to participate in the solutions to things that ail us a lot more versus just sitting on the sidelines saying, I don't really have anything that I can offer.
Yeah.
Your life is an offering.